I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder. Every morning, we awake to a world marvelously alive. Where do we encounter awe and wonder in this world? In animals and plants, in deserts, on mountains, in forests, ocean and sky, in history, art and science, in human striving and human kindness. Join us as we quest for the awe and wonder of knowing we are part of something infinitely larger than ourselves.
It feels like a gift, like wow, to be in the body, however it functions, and to see and smell and touch and taste. It's a miracle that we're here in the body, breathing and seeing.
Today's episode of Constant Wonder comes in 4 chapters that will shed light on several facets of awe. For some listeners, the most memorable part will come in the last chapter, where our guest talks about his once private, but now for many years very public, near-death experience. For others, Chapter 1 of this episode may be the most engaging. It's about human resilience after losing a limb and needing to reinvent oneself in a radically altered physical body. For yet other listeners, the most memorable part of this interview could well be when our guest reflects on how nature has routinely put him in a state of amazement and wonder. Jeff Olsen is an astonishingly resilient human being. What's the connection between resilience and awe? When a renowned awe researcher, who has actually been one of our guests on Constant Wonder, a psychologist by the name of Dacher Keltner, first began researching the causes of awe, he didn't know where his research would lead. One valuable finding turned out to be this: most reports of the experience of awe are tied to people who have observed what Keltner styles moral beauty. Essentially, with that phrase, he is referring to humans feeling inspired by other humans. Our guest for this episode, Jeff Olsen, is a colleague of mine here at BYU Broadcasting. He doesn't seek limelight, so I was pleased when he said yes to an interview, which isn't going to cover everything he has to offer, but to my mind, the events of his life do connect with this idea of moral beauty. To be just a little more specific about this concept, it's when the astonishing kindness, courage, or resilience of others inspires us to such a degree that we find ourselves humbled, overwhelmed, maybe even feeling goosebumps. So Chapter 1 now, titled simply Prosthesis. You wear boots a lot.
I do.
Is that a bit of a challenge with the prosthesis?
It can be. I mean, interesting enough, these boots are specialized. There's a zipper on the back, so I can get them on. I grew up in boots. For a long time with the prosthetic limb, I couldn't wear boots. I could not get it on the prosthetic foot because it doesn't bend and do things that a normal, real foot would do. Gosh, a few years ago, I moved back up on the farm, came back home with the horses, and my brothers are there. Everybody's wearing boots. And I found these Ariat boots that zip on the back, and I thought, I can get those on. The only issue is you've got to make sure the heel height is right, because they set the prosthetic foot and knee, everything's aligned to a certain heel height.
Well, in the season when you did not wear boots and couldn't find the right boot to go with your prosthetic device, frustrated?
I found boots. They just weren't cowboy boots. I had Red Wing lace-up boots for years, and I could get those on because I could unlace them and put them on and get the shoehorn in them. And I really wasn't frustrated with the shoe. I mean, the frustrating part was like, gosh, this prosthetic just doesn't walk like a real leg. There's no nerves and consciousness and, reaction in it, really. It's hydraulics and carbon fibers and titanium.
That's not a leg.
Yeah, there's no feeling. There's no knowing. There's no consciousness in it. Now, having said that,
you could take it all back.
I get phantom pains all the time. I mean, my foot will, it'll feel like somebody's got a fork in my shin and is cranking on it. or it'll feel like I'm hooked up to a battery cable and the electrical nerve pain is excruciating.
So you say all the time. Are you talking about daily?
Not daily, on a regular basis. I mean, once a month, I'll get these horrific phantom pains, usually when the leg is off, oddly enough, at night. I've even had sensations where it's like, wow, there's a rock in my shoe. There's no foot to fill the rock. There's certainly not a rock in there.
Well, you know, Jeff, the reason I wanted to talk to you about this is because, it's a very simple reason. There are some things in society we don't talk about, and we probably could benefit from talking about them. And I remember distinctly as a child feeling that sense of disorientation, or I didn't have the words for it then, but I know today I would call it social impropriety. You know, what do you say? What do you not say?
Yeah.
Then I served as a missionary in Austria in 1981. There was such a percentage of the population that there were amputees.
Right.
I didn't quite know what to do with my words and my thoughts and my, do I look away? Do I, don't stare, don't gawk, keep eye contact, all of those things. And I thought it'd be great to talk with you in this chapter of our conversation. And that'd be great to just kind of lay it out there.
Yeah.
Do people get weird? People, that's all general, but what have you seen?
It's yes. And I typically wear long pants. And sometimes you can't tell. Now, I'm an above-the-knee amputee. I limp. I have a interesting gait. But people wouldn't know. They wouldn't see it readily and think, oh, there's a prosthetic limb. However, when I wear shorts, and sometimes I do, I've had strange things happen. On one occasion, and I do have a handicap parking pass because walking long distances can be difficult, but I parked in a handicap parking. And there was a woman that looked at me, and I don't know what she thought, but from the torso up, she assumed, well, you're a well-bodied, healthy person, and how dare you? She came over and started giving me what for. This is a handicap spot. And I said, well, I've got a handicap tag. And she said, but you're not handicapped. And I opened the door and had shorts on. And she saw the prosthetic and she just gasped. And she responded by saying, oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for your service. and I didn't lose my limb in the service. I lost my limb in a car accident. But she was very uncomfortable and very awkward that way. I've seen people look away. I go swimming. Actually, we had a gathering at a company that I was working for, and we went to the pool, and I was excited to get in and swim. That's very liberating. There's movement. And I got to the pool. I took off the leg. I leaned it up against the chair, and I hopped over and jumped in the pool. And one of the employees came to me the next day and said, wow, he said, that traumatized my child. They have been up all night asking about why, where's his leg? What was that about? And he wasn't being critical or mean, but the word was traumatized.
Yeah.
Now, that's interesting because children are the best. I mean, they are. I was in a grocery store in shorts at one point, and I came walking up, and this mother had a child. Let's say he was 4. He was little. He was still riding in the cart, where they sit up on the where you push him there. And he looked at it, and he looked at it, and he looked at me, and he had no concern. He looked me right in the eye and he said, that is a huge owie. And I just laughed. And of course his mother said, oh dear, don't, I said, it is perfectly fine.
Oh, it's the mother saying, oh, don't. That is so interesting to me because we are exercised at what is proper.
Yeah.
And you're the type of person, and I've known you for a few years now, you're the type of person, you're not exercised about all of that stuff. I don't know how you got there, but you're not.
Well, I see things differently. We're all unique. We all have interesting things. Somebody might have, wow, those are interesting eyes. Look at their hair. And a prosthetic limb, that's interesting. That's different. I notice it all the time now. I can tell by the way someone walks, whether they've got long pants or shorts on. Oh, they're below the knee? on that left side or they're above the knee on that right side because I'm familiar with it. And I probably find myself staring like, let's see how they do. How are they walking? How are they navigating the stairs? I have found myself actually staring at other amputees to see and notice how their mobility is. Yeah. It's interesting.
There's a story I heard you tell me, and I think it'd be fun to share it here on this episode, about a child that you encountered recently.
Oh, yeah.
And just share that one. You were on vacation somewhere, I think.
Yeah, we were. I was traveling. I was traveling with other families, and there was a little boy there, and he's 4. His name is Huey. And it was Florida. I was wearing shorts on the beach. I was in the pool. And immediately he came and wanted to talk about this leg. He had no qualms. He has wonderful parents. They said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Absolutely. He can ask me anything he wants to." So he came over. What happened to your leg? And I explained, well, I got in a bad car crash and the doctors had to take off my normal leg and they built a prosthetic limb. And he said, "Well, how does it work?" And so I began explaining the socket and the valve and the hydraulics. And he said, can I touch it? And I said, "Well, yeah, you go ahead." So he's touching the components and poking around on it and seeing the valve. And I said, "Do you want to see how it works?" And he said, "Well, sure." And so I got up and I had rolled my pant leg way up. I wasn't wearing shorts at this moment. And I was explaining how if I put weight on the heel, it will lock out the knee. And then if I step my weight over and put weight on the toe, it releases the hydraulics and allows it to bend and kick back forward. And he was watching me walk back and forth. And anyway, we went out to the pool and he wanted to see me take it off. I said, "No, when I get in the pool, I'm going to have to take it off. Are you going to be okay with that?" And he said, "Yeah, show me how that works." And I told him, I said, I have a leg. It's just been, amputated. Or I said to him, it's been cut off above the knee. I said, there's no blood. There's no, it's just, I said, it kind of looks like an elbow. Just kind of looks like the end of my leg. And so he sat with me and his parents came out and we took off the prosthetic limb and he was looking at it and we got in the pool and played for hours.
This is totally Mr. Rogers stuff. Introducing a child to something that's foreign and different and unusual and walking them through it and little by little, any detail, explaining it.
Yeah, and this was a very bright, a really inquiring young boy and very intuitive about things. The fun part about it is when the trip was over and everyone had returned home, his parents reached out and they said, "We asked Huey what his favorite part of the trip was." And, we went to the Pirate Museum, we went to the beach, we went to the old fort, we even took a ghost tour around, this little St. Augustine town. And he told his parents, "My favorite part about the trip was Jeff and his robot leg." That's what he called it, was the robot leg. So children are probably naturally more intuitive. What happened? Tell me about that. How does that work? And yet somehow in our adulthood, "Oh, don't talk about that. Don't point that out. Don't stare. Don't look." And I'm not sure where that comes from, but it's certainly evident. It's certainly there.
Well, I wouldn't expect you to be a spokesperson for all people who have lost limbs, and everybody's going to be different. But I do find it very helpful to know that there are answers to some of these things, because I remember so poignantly being a young kid and being, frankly, aghast and worried, nervous. I was the scared child. I wasn't the Huey who just was fearlessly asking questions. I want to talk about, there was so much that you suffered, and we'll get to that story.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much loss, so much adjustment, so much reimagining of oneself. Can we talk about your experience reimagining yourself as an amputee?
Wow. Yes, and there was so much trauma and other injuries and other emotional traumas to deal with. I was a Division I athlete. I played football up at Utah State University. The body was at my command. I was fast. I was quick. I could react. And I took it for granted. I never thought about the fact that, wow, I don't even have to teach my feet how to run. They just naturally do it. And to imagine myself as an amputee was really difficult. However, I was in a wheelchair for a long time. I mean, the injuries were such. Both my legs were crushed, my back was damaged, my shoulder was damaged. For a long time, I literally had to be assisted into a electric wheelchair that I could drive with my left hand. That was really challenging. I would get looks that way too. And I have a dear friend that's permanently in a wheelchair. So for me, wow, I'll be able to stand and walk at some point. They were able to repair the right leg, and it's got 6 pins and a plate holding that together. That x-ray is probably as interesting as the prosthetic on the outside. But the driving force, the imagining myself as an amputee is, oh, if I could just stand and walk, just put one foot in front of the other, that would be a miracle. That would be amazing. And that was the deep motivation, is I want to stand up. I want to walk again. I want to be upright and ambulatory, as they would say in the medical realms. And they told me I would be, and so that was a goal. I'm going to get to that point.
Do you ever slip back in your mind to being in that wheelchair again? Do you ever dream about that? Does it come back to you, the barrier to your mobility?
Yeah, it does. I had a dear friend that would pick me up and bring me to work. I mean, at that point, I couldn't even drive. He was always willing to push me around, as were my brothers. I was surrounded by so many wonderful family and friends. And in the wheelchair, I wanted to do it myself. Let me do this. And so even though I had a really bad shoulder injury, they had repaired that enough that with my arms down, I did have enough strength to wheel the wheels with me in the wheelchair. I couldn't lift anything over my head, but downward, the arms and the hands had enough strength. And I pushed myself around in that wheelchair till I wore my hands raw, with blisters, and I went and got gloves.
Did you see yourself as being kind of fierce? Determined, I should say, maybe?
I was determined. I was a father. I was determined to raise my son, to get well, to move forward and be productive and independent in life. I did not like someone pushing me around. They were happy to do it. The deep sense of gratitude I had with, oh gosh, I can stand up. I remember the first time I was allowed to stand on the one leg with the assistance of bars and a walker and nurses, to stand up. And the ability to bear weight on my one leg. This was still when I was in the late stages of the hospital. And I suppose I was fierce. But in the fierceness, there was this grand humility. It's like, wow, I stood up. Well, come on, that's nothing. People stand up all the time. I pushed myself this far in the wheelchair. I may have been fierce, but I saw and was aware of what felt like such severe limitations based on what I was used to.
Without talking yet, and we'll talk about the crash, just the simple fact that you had your leg altered radically, did you resent that fact?
I grieved it. I don't know that I resented it. I was alive. I was breathing. There was times later that I got really angry about it. I'm talking years after. It's like, gosh, I just want to go for a run. And I probably did resent that. At the time, I was so focused on emotional healing, on healing to live. I mean, my intestines were all ruptured. I had a colostomy bag. They were attempting to get the right arm working. And I had a not funny, but strange pause, because I didn't have full use of my right arm, but it was healing and I began to get use of it. And I asked myself the strange question. I could say it was a funny question, but I thought, well, would I prefer to lose an arm or a leg? And that was, I contemplated that. I realized I really like having both hands and both arms. And so I suppose if I were to make a choice, and then I would inquire, is it my choice on some cosmic level that the leg was taken rather than the arm? Yeah, there were all kinds of strange things.
Did you chide yourself for being irrational?
Yes, I did. I thought, well, what kind of a question is that? And then it got to the point where I was asking, well, for me, the worst thing I suppose I could lose would be my eyesight. I mean, these were the irrational questions. Is a leg better than an arm? Is a long arm, worse than my eyes or my hearing? And I had irrationally asked these questions and came to a place of acceptance. I won't say contentment. I won't say acceptance that, well, the leg is the leg, and I will walk, and I can see, and I can breathe, and I can use my hands. And that's a blessing, given how bad it could be.
Yeah. I have one last question pertaining specifically to having a prosthesis. You already mentioned that you kind of compare how things go for other amputees.
Right.
But in terms of just looking at John Q. Public, Jane W. Public, whatever the middle initial is, do you compare yourself to others as a disabled person? Am I on the even footing with other people?
Yeah. I suppose we all do. And yes, I do. I mean, even I'm older now. I look at young 30-year-olds and think, wow, I wish, wouldn't that be great to be? I think we naturally compare. And interesting you ask, I just went through an evaluation at the prosthetic place where the big corporate guys came in to assess my mobility. What am I able to do based on a missing leg? And wow, I tested out great. They said, you're in the top 20% of all amputees, like all across the country.
Yeah, give me a cap and gown. I'm going to march, right?
Yeah. I'm like, you guys, I can't even go up the stairs very gracefully. Are you kidding me? And so I'm grateful. At the same time, I compare, and I'll see videos of amputees, and they're doing amazing things both below the knee and above the knee. And I always say, well, that person must be below the knee because they're really mobile. They've got a knee joint. Or I'll say, well, they're above the knee, and I think I walk a little smoother than they do. And then there you go.
That's the old athlete in you coming. You were a competitive athlete.
I was. And I mean, many of the doctors said that's what saved you. Apparently, I'm a really good walker for and above the knee. And I don't know if that has anything to do with athleticism or just drive, or a really good prosthetic doctor that really aligns me well, and it's probably all of it.
Well, all I can say is good on you.
Well, thank you. You're kind. You're kind.
In just a moment, Chapter 2 of today's episode with Jeff Olsen. We'll explore his feelings of awe for creation. Jeff's not an extreme sports guy, but using his prosthetic leg, he still likes to get outdoors and hike and finds deep meaning in this vast universe among natural wild things down here below and under the stars above. I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder. Jeff, in this second part, Chapter 2, I've given it a title, actually. And this is going to be a little strange because having talked about you're missing a leg, the prosthetic, all the challenges there, and we're going to be talking about the loss of your wife and the son in the car crash that brought all of that together. But this Chapter 2 is a middle section that I've titled The Blessing of Wild Things, and I'm referring to nature or creation. And I thought it would be profitable to get a sense for your general worldview of being a human being alive with a body in a world that's real. And I know from you having described it before that on a pleasant evening, looking out at a beautiful valley where you live, mountains, when the wildfires aren't burning, the air's clear. Yeah. Go back in your mind to some of your experiences that were formative, that taught you to care about nature, the world.
Yeah, I grew up on a little family farm, and rain was a big deal. The crops were a big deal. How do they grow? The animals, the cows, the horses, All of that was mesmerizing. And I remember being very young, asking my dad, well, what about that? And what about that? But feeling his reliance on the weather, watching the sky. One of the biggest formative things was I would go out at nighttime. Usually it was in the summer because the nights were warmer, and it was a small community, a dark sky community. I remember going out in the field where it's dark and laying on the bales of hay before we moved them in and looking at the stars.
Where were you?
I grew up in Charleston, Utah, which nobody knows. It's a suburb of Midway. I laugh and say it's a suburb of Midway. Charleston is a little town outside of Heber City. When I grew up there, there was nothing but farms.
Any river otters left during those days, or were they gone by then?
I never saw a river otter. Lots of muskrats, but no river otters. But there was plenty of muskrats and what we called rock chucks that would...
Probably yellow-bellied marmot.
We just called them rock chucks and woodchucks. But it was country life. I mean, we were out in the country. It was beautiful. The mountains were there. It's the Wasatch Back is what people know it as. And the dark sky, I would look into the sky and just be mesmerized. And the depth of the stars and the multitude of the stars. I mean, the Milky Way is right there, and you're like, wow, there's what looked like billions. I'm sure there are billions of stars. There's no number.
Milky Way, at last count, about 100 billion.
100 billion.
That's just one galaxy.
Yeah, that's one little piece, and that's where I felt so small, and yet there was something that allowed me to feel so magnificent. It's like, oh, I'm connecting to that. I'm part of that, and that's part of me. And I was probably 8 or 10, laying on the bale of hay, watching the sky, and I was absolutely awestruck. And I was awestruck with how the hay grew. We'd grow alfalfa hay and cut the hay and turn the hay and bale the hay and water the hay, and up it came again. And then baby calves were born. It was a miracle to me. They were so cute. I loved all of that. And so that was formative. That was kind of the foundation. These formative years, as we say, the hard work was formative. I mean, I laugh with a buddy of mine. He says, oh, they're strong. You can go in the weight room and get strong. But then there's farm strong. We would laugh about, we'd go to 2-a-day football practice and do practice all morning and then come and haul hay all day and then go to the evening practice and then come home and milk the cows at night. And it was, that was formative. It was a work ethic and a feeling of you've got to get it done.
Going back, though, to watching the stars or watching the hay grow or thinking about the miracle of it all, that doesn't necessarily ever present answers where you can say, that's now normal, I'm accustomed to that, it's just the way the world is, and I'm no longer spellbound by it. I'm guessing if you graduated out of that kind of childlike wonder, because society will do that to us,
Oh, and I had graduated out of that wonder and awe. I was going to get off that farm and get out of that one-horse town and go away to college and do something big and important. And this was the driving force. And then the accident, as you mentioned, that spun me back into, wow, every day's a gift. I mean, if I can watch a sunrise, the awe came back. Wow, what a miracle. What a beautiful miracle. And to watch anything grow. Grass, hay, flowers, trees.
Weeds?
Wheat, yes.
Oh, I said weeds.
Oh, weeds. Weeds. Even the weeds. I mean, here's the funny thing, thistles, weeds, dandelions. And I've now in my later life realized there's such medical properties to a dandelion. I drink dandelion tea to keep my heart healthy. And thistles apparently are very nutritious. I don't eat thistles, but the things that grow so abundantly that we call weeds, many have huge medicinal properties, and I didn't even realize it.
The reason I'm messing with you here on the weed issue is because we are socialized to think about dismissing certain things that are alive. We're not going to think about that. It doesn't matter. We're not going to think about the weeds. We're not going to think about those life forms that are so small and insignificant that they don't leave us overwhelmed like Niagara Falls or the Grand Teton when we see that in a national park or something.
Yeah.
Do you get the national park vibe by sitting on your porch watching the sunset go down, or do you have to be in a national park for it?
I personally get it everywhere. And I mean, this came to me in an interesting moment. I mean, I was out of the wheelchair, I was walking, I was healed. I was actually, life had moved on. I had 3 sons and ready to hike. I was hiking, and I took them up hiking. And in my frustration, I realized I can't get it as far as I want to go. They wanted to keep going. And by this time, my oldest son, Spencer, was about 13, 14. He was old enough and big enough to know where to take his younger brothers. And so I said, I'm going to sit here and wait. I needed to rest. My leg was sore. I was done hiking up this trail, and I sat on this rock feeling sorry for myself. I can't even keep up with my boys, and they're little still. And as I sat on that rock, I noticed all these little teeny wildflowers. I don't know what they were. I would have walked right past them had I not sat down and looked at them. Suddenly I could see them, every one of them. And it was like a national forest moment. I'm like, look at all these flowers in all different colors and all their magnificence. I did have thoughts come in like, consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. It's like, wow, look at that. I grew up reading the Bible and knew the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm like, consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. But I went to the last verse where it was like, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And I'm looking at these little flowers, and I'm contemplating that verse, and it's almost like I heard it in my heart. I heard, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God in everything. And every one. You know, not trying to change the verse, but suddenly it was like this awe at the flowers, the clouds, the birds, the trees. And then, you know, my boys came back down the trail as they'd gotten to the top where they wanted to go. And I thought, I even see divinity in them, in everything. So yes, I do have awe moments on my back porch watching a dragonfly flutter by, and it feels like a gift, like, wow, what a beautiful moment to be in, and to be in the body, however it functions, and to see and smell and touch and taste and be in this moment, in this life.
We're visiting with Jeff Olsen today on Constant Wonder, and we'll speak next with him about some of the particulars relating to the automobile crash that changed his life course. It was a classic single-car accident at freeway speed, Jeff, the driver, overcorrecting after falling asleep at the wheel, the vehicle then rolling between 6 and 8 times. He'll go over much of that, and then, before the end of this episode, we'll hear him reflect on the near-death experience he wrote about in his book titled Knowing, Memoirs of a Journey Beyond the Veil and Choosing Joy After Tragic Loss. I'm Marcus Smith. Chapter 3, The Crash. How many years has it been?
It has now been 28 years.
And in those 28 years, as I understand your life course, you went through the horrible shock of the reality of what you had lost, the people you had lost, the leg you had lost, the future you had lost. At some point, we talk about resilience, and the word can never do justice to what you were up against. You decided, I could tell people my story publicly. And that led to books, that led to lectures, that led to video accounts. I can find you on YouTube. You got to know Dr. Raymond Moody, I believe, the guy who wrote Life After Life. There is, Jeff, this is going to sound a little bad when I say this, and I apologize for that, but there's an industry that has arisen around near-death experiences, life after life. And your efforts to be public, I know that you proceeded with some caution because these are personal.
Yeah. I mean, the crash was horrific. I mean, part of the reason I didn't talk about it was so painful. To my best recollection, I dozed off at the wheel with my whole family in the car. I mean, the guilt, the regret. I was a young man. I was 33 years old. I had started my own advertising agency with some fantastic partners. You know, you're working those 12, 14, 16-hour days, and you're in that role of provider and protector and going to make this business work and going to get the client. And
on a scale of 1 to 10, how ambitious were you? 10 being the tops.
I was pretty ambitious. I used to tease the staff and say, we only work half days here. You just choose which 12 hours you're here. I mean, it was driven. And, you know, I was in the creative realms, and you know how that is, like ideas. Well, I might come up with an idea in a moment, and it might take me 3 days. I don't know. So that was the driving force. And there's no excuses for dozing off at the wheel, but that was the context. And I nodded off.
Can I just stop you for a moment? Because you just placed a judgment on yourself and said there's no excuse.
Right.
We don't know why people become, at times, not cognizant of one can black out for any number of reasons.
True.
Any number of reasons.
True.
I called you out.
You did. You did. And maybe there's still something in there that says, wow, I dozed off.
You took the blame for it, whether it was yours to take or not.
Yeah. I was driving the car. The interesting thing is that's one of the reasons I didn't share. I didn't want to talk about all the things that had happened in the crash. My wife and youngest son were killed instantly. My 7-year-old was banged up a little bit, but basically walked away from the accident. I was severely injured, both legs crushed, left leg amputated above the knee. My back was damaged.
Intestinal, shoulder, no head trauma?
Well, I might be crazy.
I didn't. That's not where I was going.
No head trauma. I mean, that's the crazy thing. In fact, the doctors were quite interested in how I survived such an accident without head trauma and without being graphic. That's what took the lives of my wife and youngest son. They felt my shoulders were so banged up because somewhere naturally, intuitively, I knew how to protect my head with my shoulders. Maybe it was that football stuff. I don't know, but no head trauma. No.
Where were you exactly?
We were just outside of a little town called Parowan, headed northbound on I-15 in Utah. We'd been down to southern Utah to look at all the awe and wonder of the red rocks and the formations there, and we were driving back to Bountiful, Utah.
Visiting in-laws down there?
Yeah, we were visiting my wife's folks.
Just a family vacation? This was routine? This was normal?
Yeah, it was the Easter weekend. So, you know, it was a big celebration. We drove down on a Friday and we celebrated Saturday and Sunday, and then we were on our way home. But it was a routine. We always visited family. When we had time off, that was the priority. And this time it was going to see my wife's folks, and her grandparents were down there, and we made the trip, and it was on the way home that the crash took place.
How long did it take for emergency personnel to come?
Well, interesting enough, I mean, there was enough traffic there, and I've become dear friends with these people. There was a doctor and his wife, and they had children in their car, about the same age as we were. They were there relatively quickly. Before I lost consciousness, the last thing I heard was emergency vehicles, the sirens coming in. So there was people on the scene probably moments after the accident happened. And I don't know that anyone saw the accident happen, but people arrived shortly after the car came to a stop. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question now, and I would wager that you've never been asked this question. Is there any value, is there any utility in rehearsing the particulars of a crash like this? I know that we try to put things together in our mind. We are, by human nature, we can't tell our stories. We can't live our lives without trying to, we chart it out. What was the time frame? Where did it happen? Mm-hmm. Do you find that to be useful?
I do now. I didn't want to talk about it for years, and yet I did. I wanted to talk about it with people very close to me who were a part of it, my brothers, my parents, my in-laws. I wanted to somehow make sense of it. And for me, if I can talk about something, if I can put the words out on the table when it doesn't make sense and look at it that way, I'm a verbal processor. Although I didn't want to talk about it, and I certainly didn't want to talk about it publicly. But privately, I did want to sit down with someone I loved and trusted and was a part of it and say, tell me what happened, or tell me what you know, or share with them what I knew.
Do you remember how you grieved?
Mm-hmm.
By that, I mean, obviously you grieved, but I'm not talking about the depth of your grief. I'm wondering about how did you have a conscious approach to grieving? Or did you just was it just an organic, whatever comes, and if I have to sob, I'll sob. If I have to be alone, I'll be alone. If I have to pound my fist against a door, I'll do that. How did you go about grieving?
It was very organic. Now in the hospital, I was immobile. I was ventilated. I couldn't even speak. That was a unnegotiable, way of grieving. I just was wallowing in it. But I'll never forget a moment then, and I was in and out of consciousness. I mean, I was really in a bad way. But I remember my wife's father came in, and I was conscious. I was aware that he had come in the room. Big, powerful guy, 6'5". He had been a collegiate basketball player. He was a basketball coach, commanded respect, and he came in, and I couldn't talk. I was ventilated, but there he was. That was the father of my wife, who had passed away in the accident, and I was driving the car, and this big hulk of a man, big, tall, muscular, big guy. He came in the room, and I felt so responsible. There was this guilt in me. And he came over and he just laid down his head on my chest and started to sob. And we just cried together. Nobody knew what to say. But the fact that he would come over that close, that he would come and lay on my chest, he didn't lay down on the bed, but he bent over and put his head and torso on my chest, and we just cried. And nothing had to be said. And that was the grief early on. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't speak. I was ventilated. I didn't say much to anyone but my younger brother and my mother. And eventually I talked to others. But there was a silence grief, and it was very organic. There was times that felt like absolute panic. Just absolute panic. What happened? And there was days I was angry. And yeah, it went on for years. It might have been, I might be driving down the road on any given Tuesday, and a song comes on the radio, or I'll see something, or I'll have a thought, and the tears still come. Grief, I have a dear friend who said this to me. He said, grief is like a stone you carry in your pocket. He said, you get used to the weight, but it never goes away. I've experienced joy and bliss at levels, and I've experienced deep sorrow and grief. And yet that's the experience, that we came to experience all of it. And I know such joy because I've had such sorrow, and I know such bliss because I've had such grief. It was organic for me. It would come like tidal waves. I didn't have a conscious way of getting through it. And maybe even the physical stuff was a break or a distraction from the emotional stuff to work my way through that.
I'm so glad you said the thing about the stone in the pocket, because I think that is a safeguard for us as we move into what is really chapter 4 of our conversation. And I say it's a safeguard because in this genre of near-death experiences, of life after life, of anything that has to do with visions or dreams or the other world, there is a pronounced tendency for humans to be too simple about it and think that the grief and the sorrow are eradicated when somehow God comes into the picture, or there's, be it angels or dreams or feelings of spirituality, there is a tendency for people to think that the stone goes away or the pocket won't have that stone. And that's why I say I think this is a safeguard. So for chapter 4 of our conversation, Jeff, I wanted to talk about, and I gave it a title, this chapter. It's A World Beyond This One. And I want to preface it saying that for all of your public, your willingness to be public about this, you know that the attempt to kind of share things of the other world is kind of, there's a huge gap between what we try to share and what can ever be shared.
That is true. And what what we even choose to share. And I didn't want to share the story. I didn't want people to think I was crazy. I didn't want people to think that I thought I was special in some way because I'd had these experiences. And it was painful. And I never would have shared it publicly, quite honestly.
Well, I'm going to want you to actually enumerate some of you said the crazy and the weird and whatever, the things that people don't want to believe. And I want to say this. Everything you're about to say, that I've invited you here to say about the world beyond this one, where we can maybe access it, the life after life stuff, right? I believe you. I haven't lost a wife and a son. Your experience is completely different from mine. But I have had experiences that fit into a category that has long been described the way you've described your experiences in terms of the other side of this creation that's not physical, that's spiritual. So I believe you. You had dreams. You had experiences. Yeah. Can you enumerate just briefly?
I can.
Because what you've had to share, people can find this on YouTube. They can read your book. They can, but just in brief, what were the things that happened that were too improbable to even be true?
Well, first of all, at the scene of the accident, I'm losing consciousness. I wasn't even necessarily aware of my injuries, but before I was extricated from the car and life flighted to a level 1 trauma center, I was aware that half the family was gone. I had a 7-year-old that was hysterically crying in the back seat. But I had an out-of-body experience. Like all of a sudden, all that trauma I was surrounded by light. And it felt like I was rising above the accident scene and the pain, the injuries. I could breathe. I didn't hurt. And in that light, I had an encounter with my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, but she was very much alive and beautiful and gorgeous. She had no injuries, and we communicated about the fact that if I stayed with her, our little 7-year-old would be orphaned. And she was actually emphatic, you got to go back. I wanted to stay. She's like, you got to go back. And we made a choice, and I came back. So this was an out-of-body near-death experience. And wow, I had experiences in the hospital, and it was of the other realm. I was not in my body. I was not in this dimension. I was in another realm. And it's difficult to talk about that because people say, well, I've been told all the oxygen was shutting off to your brain, you were hallucinating. And I I don't understand all the science, but
Do you get told that directly? Do people actually are they brazen enough to explain to you what you experience and say you've got to understand it in different terms?
I've had some say that to me. Now, I've had many others like you that say, I believe you. And dream, I don't know what, was it a dream? Was it a vision? Was it a visitation? Was it I've used the word dream because maybe people can accept that. And I have had people say, well, here's what happened. The oxygen shut off and you hallucinated and that's what happened to you. But I had these profound out-of-body experiences. And yet what that did was give meaning to the experience in the body. That's what I love about what we're talking about. Everybody's so interested in what it was like to be out of the body, what it was like to be on the other side. And perhaps the real insight is, wow, what's it like to be in the body, here, now, in this realm, experiencing what we're experiencing and having a life experience. I had an interesting experience in the hospital, and this was unique. This is what Dr. Raymond Moody was so intrigued with. As I was life flighted into the Level 1 Trauma Center, one of the doctors and one of the nurses had a profound spiritual experience in the operating room. And it was so profound to them, they later came and recounted it to me, not knowing who I was, not knowing that I had had an out-of-body experience. In fact, it was the nurse that felt so inspired that they needed to talk to me about it. She grabbed the doctor and said, we need to go tell that guy what we experienced. And they had an experience where the doctor recounted, and he's written a book about this now, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll. He said, as you were life flighted in, and we had a whole team, working on you because there was so many different injuries. He said, we encountered your wife's spirit in the operating room. And they didn't even know me. And I'm like, I began to cry. I said, you did? He said, yes, she communicated with me. And I asked, what did she say? And he said, she simply shared her gratitude for what we were doing to save your life. And then the tears really came. I'm like, he doesn't know I made this deal. He doesn't know we had this conversation that she said, you've got to go back and raise our son. And I believed him because I may have believed him anyway. I'm a believer, but we had this connection. We've become dear friends. And I don't think I ever would have spoken about it publicly. There I was. He was a clinician. I had whispered to my family what had happened. I had shared that in very tight circles, but here was a stranger who didn't know me. It was very unique, and I still didn't want to talk about it publicly. In fact, he and I became friends because I wanted to talk to him more, and I did. And even when I got out of the hospital, I shared what had happened, and he believed me.
Were you kind of led to? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but were you prompted or pushed or
in a big way? In fact, I taught a Sunday school class in our little local congregation, and I hadn't even talked about it there, but I was teaching a lesson.
Oh, and how many years after the accident
is that? This was 8 or 10 years after the accident, and I was teaching a lesson on the love of God. And part of my out-of-body or near-death experience is I was in the other realms. And I even got to hold and kiss and say goodbye to my little boy who passed away. But as I did that, I was held in the arms of God, of the divine. I was holding my child, and I had so much guilt about the crash, and I was driving, and my little boy's here because I lost control, and And I felt this presence behind me, which was so cosmic and powerful and overwhelming. And I'm holding my little boy weeping, thinking I've failed the test. I mean, how as a father, could this happen? And I felt this presence coming closer and closer as I'm holding my child and feeling the guilt about the crash. And as the presence behind me got so close, I had the thought, I hope I can be forgiven. And everything felt so physical. I mean, my gosh, I could smell my little boy's hair. I could feel him breathing. And when I had that thought, this felt physical too. These divine arms wrapped around and held me and my little boy. And there was just this download of peace and calm and oneness, really. Oneness. It was a very personal experience, but I knew that that rippled out to every living thing. You know, I had grown up believing that, well, God was going to judge me and I was probably in trouble, you know, based on, and these are beliefs, right? And yet here I was in the arms of what was so divine, of God, and there was nothing but love. And here I am holding my child and thinking he's perfect, he's beloved, he is all of it. Yet that was multiplied by being in the arms of God and feeling, well, yeah, that's how I feel about all of you. What I was feeling for my son, I felt God feeling for me and he, and I knew it rippled out to every living thing.
That rippling out to every living thing, I'm coming back to that oneness with more than you and your son, more than you and God, but with every living thing. This calls to mind a lot of the reading I've done, and I did the reading because I've had that feeling of being in union with all other beings. And this is a classic description of what is often called a mystical union. The father of psychology, William James, he writes this book back, 100 plus years ago, called The Varieties of Religious Experience. And he's just one of many people who have talked about mystical union. And experiences of awe and wonder can lead to a sense of being, yes, small in a vast cosmos, but being part of it, which you've already talked about, and then being somehow melded together where the ego recedes and you're part of everyone else. You've told a story about seeing a stranger and finding yourself then embracing him. I think maybe we should probably end on this. One can actually feel like you're part of everyone else.
Yeah. And this was what was so difficult to say. It's like, wow, I was part of God. I was seeing things through those divine eyes, which connected me to everything. It's like the whole universe was connected for my silly little life, and yet this thing was so profound. And it changed me. You know, I was the red personality, competitive, you know. I had experienced true, unconditional, divine love. And of course, you know, I came back into my broken body and I, you know, got well and went back to work and learned to walk again, all these things that you do. But this oneness never really quite left me. Now, I'm a normal guy, you know, still going to work and gosh, somebody cuts me off and I'm angry at that and I got these stresses and these things and all so the things.
The compassion comes and goes, huh?
Yeah, I'm not walking around, you know, like in awe all the time of everyone. But there's instances, I was working downtown and there was, you know, a lot of homeless people in the area. I was leaving work and this fellow came up and, you know, I mean, gosh, he smelled bad. And I thought, you know, from everything I could ascertain, he's a homeless guy and he was asking me for money. I was making an excuse of, well, look, I got to go, I've got to run and I'm in a hurry. And that whisper came, you know, call it spirit. Something just said, look at him. Look right in his eyes, look at him. And I did. And it was an interesting experience because there I was, and as I looked at him, suddenly I could see my brothers, you know, who almost lost their jobs to come and sit with me in the hospital. And then I could see myself. This could be me. I might have been the guy strung out on the corner wondering what happened had I not had the experiences I had, which really may have been what bolstered me through this whole thing. So I'm looking at this fellow and suddenly filled with such compassion. There's my brothers, there's me. And then before my very eyes, he becomes divine. I'm looking at God in a homeless man, in ragged clothes, and I just embraced him. I threw my arms around him. And I almost heard myself. I said to him, I know who you are. And he embraced me back. We were both crying. And he said, I know you know. And, there is that verse that says, beware of how you treat strangers, for you might be entertaining angels unaware. I don't know what happened, but suddenly here I was, two guys embracing each other in the street, tears streaming down our face. I would have given him everything in my wallet. And yet that's not what he really wanted. He just wanted to be seen and acknowledged. And that was oneness. Doesn't happen every moment of every day, but in that moment it happened again. And I thought, wow, we're all connected to each other in some beautiful cosmic way.
You're confident that those moments for you, even if they're intermittent, even if it's not every moment of our day, you're confident that they can happen again?
Yes, and they do. And it's unexpected. It's not like I'm going to go out and, have this experience.
You get ambushed by
it? A little bit. And it brings tears, even talking about it. The emotions are always so tender and so real. And I'll experience this watching the sunset. And I'm just overcome with such gratitude, such joy, such reverence that, wow, look at that. I had someone say to me once, why do you look at the sunset all the time? And I said, look, I'm pointing, and they said, well, if you've seen one, you've seen them all. And I said, oh, no, I will never, ever again in my whole life see that one, ever. This is a once-in-a-lifetime moment. And I do feel that way. When life is disrupted, when people you love pass, and we've all experienced it. We all experience life. You realize you might not get tomorrow. Embrace today. It's a miracle that we're here in the body, breathing and seeing. And, I have people that are grieving come to me and say, when will I get over it? I don't know. I haven't gotten over it. I've gotten used to it, but perhaps death is what gives life meaning. Perhaps that's what brings meaning to this beautiful, crazy, challenging experience.
Jeffrey Olsen has been our guest today. He's written a book that includes many scenes and details beyond what we were able to talk about here in this episode. It's titled Knowing: Memoirs of a Journey Beyond the Veil and Choosing Joy After Tragic Loss. Jeff is my colleague here at BYU Broadcasting, where he works as the Director of Creative Services. I'm Marcus Smith. Constant Wonder is a production of BYU Radio.